Thank you, everybody, and good morning. My name is Michael Bass, and as the steering committee chair of the JCRC's Esther Raab Holocaust Museum and Goodwin Education Center, it is my pleasure to welcome everyone to our annual Generations After Brunch. While we had hoped to meet in person this year, we erred on the side of caution and once again chose a Zoom option for the 2022 event. So I hope all of you have your coffee and your bagels by your side this morning and are ready for a great conversation. As everyone knows, we're losing survivors every year, making it imperative that subsequent generations continue to tell their family stories. All of us at the Raab Goodwin Center work to educate students, teachers, and community members about the importance of confronting and addressing anti-Semitism, bullying, hate, bigotry, and discrimination, and our work is never ending. But the letters that the center receives from students and teachers after our speakers have addressed the classes are heartwarming and are a reconfirmation that we are succeeding in our efforts and reinforce that what we do is still so important. If anyone knows of a survivor or a next-gen member with a story that needs to be told, I urge you to contact them, to have them contact Helen Kirschbaum, our Raab Goodwin director, or any member of our steering committee. We welcome the opportunity to open a discussion with them and are happy to help any of you get ready to share your family story. The Holocaust survivor team from our partners at Jewish Family and Children's Service, an agency of our Jewish Federation of Southern New Jersey, also works with our survivors as well as their families. They provide concrete and emotional services to both groups, such as counseling, emotional and educational support, a kosher food pantry, catered home delivery of kosher meals, as well as community resources. They also offer liaison services with the Claims Conference and lead the Holocaust Advisory Board, on which my mother sits at the age of 91, to assist in making financial decisions regarding funds received through the conference. The JFCS also offers Cafe Europa, a venue for our local survivors to meet and talk over lunch. There's also a Friday Zoom program for our survivors. a monthly hope and healing trip for them to meet and mingle with survivors in Vineland, and a monthly hope and healing program for survivors from the former Soviet Union in our area. All of these programs are managed by our amazing JFCS Director of Holocaust Survivor Services and Advocacy, Gail Belfer. Erin will place the contact information for Helen as well as for Gail in the chat box for you. This morning, it is also my privilege to introduce you to our speaker, Anna Salton Eisen, the daughter of two Holocaust survivors who would not share their stories with her until she was an adult. Subsequently, Anna wrote two books about her father's experiences during the Holocaust. The first book, The 23rd Psalm, a Holocaust memoir, Anna wrote with her father. The second book is a memoir titled Pillar of Salt, a daughter's life in the shadow of the Holocaust, which Anna wrote with her son, Aaron Eisen, and which completes the story of the first book. Anna and Aaron have also produced a documentary film together titled In My Father's Words, which is set for release in 2023. The film, based on her two books, is about a daughter's journey into her father's experience of the Holocaust. Anna has conducted extensive research on the Holocaust and has spoken to students and community groups. She has served as a docent for the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. Also, she has conducted survivor interviews for the USC Shoah Foundation. Anna is an ambassador to #EveryNameCounts, a digital initiative of the Arelson Archives, the world's most comprehensive archive of victims and survivors of Nazi persecution. Anna was a founding member and first president of Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville, Texas, where the rabbi and 3 others were taken hostage last January. She is also a licensed social worker who practiced as a therapist specializing in mental health and trauma. We are honored to have Anna join us this morning. She's going to share her story with you, and then we'll be happy to answer questions when she finishes. So please put your questions in the chat box for her. Welcome, Anna, and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me. I'm so delighted to be among you. I'm not part of a survivor or 2G or 3G group here where I am in a small community in Texas. So I'm really honored to be among you. I know that all of us share the same blessings of parents or grandparents who have remarkable stories of survival. And we all, I think, share a common mission to keep those stories alive. I have been doing this for a long time. I moved to Texas, and you'll see in the story, and really learned about the Holocaust in the museum that was established here in 1985, one of the first in the country. And for the past, 30 years, and even since my childhood, have been doing research, and there's still, I feel, so much to discover and know. As I just shared, there was an AP article I was interviewed for that went nationwide. When I started doing this 20 years ago, the Holocaust was a history lesson. And now it's kind of turned into a lesson in current events, where students used to ask me about Hitler. Now they want to ask me about Kanye's view on Hitler. So I think that it's important for many, many reasons that are growing and changing along with the increase that we see in anti-Semitism. So I feel that this is, a time to really get out there and try and make an impact and preserve, the truth of history and the moral lessons that we can learn and must learn. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
My name is Salton Eisen, and I'm the daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors. Like many Holocaust survivors, my parents never spoke about their past, and it wasn't until I was about 7 or 8 that I began to realize that my family was different. We had no photographs of relatives in the house because, especially on my father's side, we had no relatives. My father never spoke of his childhood or family, and if I asked questions about his youth, he would look very sad and often just change the subject or begin speaking to my mother in a foreign language. About this time, I remember going into our den to look for a deck of playing cards. I reached my hand into a side table drawer and pulled out 2 stiff pieces of paper. They were watercolor paintings, vivid and frightening. I had never seen images like this in a school book or storybook, and I couldn't understand what they were or why they were in my house. The second painting was of a young man kneeling before a pit of bloodied bodies while a soldier pointed a pistol to his head. They were both signed by an L. Zaltzman, a name I didn't know. I put them back in the drawer, knowing I had found something I was not supposed to see, and never spoke of them for nearly 30 years. On my own, I began searching for answers to my questions. I heard my parents mention new words like boxcars, ghettos, and camps when they thought I wasn't listening, and even went into the school library where I found a photo of a liberated camp and wondered if the piles of bodies was the secret and what had happened to my family. It wasn't until I was an adult and moved to Texas where I discovered a Holocaust museum and finally learned about the Holocaust. I became a guide there and then began interviewing Holocaust survivors on tape for a research foundation. It was then that I decided that I did not want a stranger asking my father his story, but that I wanted it to be me. I confronted my father after so many years of silence, and this was his response. I am Adam. Everyone and everything is gone, and it all starts over with me. But all I knew about my grandmother is that she died in a gas chamber, and that wasn't enough. I asked my father to share his story and to consider going back with me to Poland. In a few weeks, my family was on a plane, and we were turning back time to learn what had happened to our people, our family, and to my father. We would go to the major sites in Poland, but also to the small remote towns where he had grown up and been in the ghetto. We visited the famous Camp Auschwitz, where we walked along the tracks that led the boxcars into the camp where prisoners were selected to work or go to the gas chambers. I stood in this barracks where some prisoners had made a shoddy ladder and could not imagine how starving and weak prisoners could endure the bitter winters without blankets or proper clothes in these terrible places. We visited empty synagogues where cutouts of Jews in prayer served as a painful reminder of the lives and communities that were swiftly murdered. In the markets, I was stunned to see wooden figurines for sale of these murdered Jews. The features were stereotypical, and along with Jews with prayer books and musical instruments were Jews with bags of money. The old stereotypes and misconceptions were still alive and for sale. We returned to my father's hometown of Tichin. He showed us the old yellow building that had been his elementary school. We walked the neighborhoods and he showed us where his friends, like the Tuchmans, had lived. And we even went into his childhood home where the owner showed us how he was remodeling the rooms into a boarding house. I found myself standing in my grandmother's kitchen, trying to imagine her standing there with me, trying to imagine having a grandmother. Upstairs in the town hall was a closet with remnants from a few gravestones from the Jewish cemetery, which the Nazis had destroyed. There was a box of drawings from the Jewish children that had once lived in the town, and we were astonished to see his friend's name, the Tuchmans. We walked by the creek, deep in the woods, where his family had fled in the dark of the night to hide when the Nazis came to town to arrest and beat up the Jews. Slowly, the story of my father's life was revealed, a life of loss and sadness and suffering. And I learned that my father was the artist who painted those watercolors. My father was Lucien Zaltzman. Here, as a baby, in one of the only photos of his family. My grandfather Herman, a lawyer, my grandmother Anna, my father as a baby, and his older brother, Monik. My father, later in life, began to draw some of the things he had witnessed and experienced. Here, memories of his childhood town before the war. Children playing, Jews walking to the synagogue, and a life that seemed happy and safe. But things changed on September 1st, 1939, when the Germans occupied his town. First, they arrested many of the community leaders, including my grandfather, who was arrested, beaten, and tortured in a Gestapo prison. Jews over the age of 13 were forced to wear armbands with a Star of David, and the Nazis could arrest, humiliate, or even kill Jews for no reason. Here he shows how some were forced to scrub the streets. The Nazis vandalized the synagogue and brought the Torah scrolls, which have written in them the 5 books of the Jewish Bible, and set them on fire. And then, after 2 years of poverty, brutality, and misery, the Jews were ordered to take what belongings they could carry and were relocated to a nearby town where a ghetto had been established. 23,000 Jews would live in a small area without enough room, medical care, or food. It was a place of great danger and uncertainty. Daimler-Benz, who makes Mercedes, had taken over a factory to make airplane engines and needed more workers. Close to 500 Jews, including my father and his brother, were chosen for this work and separated from their families. All of the other Jews were going to be sent on boxcars to farms to live in, but that was a lie. They were sent just a short distance to the Belzec death camp, where they were all gassed on the same day they arrived. Thus began my father's terrible odyssey through 10 Nazi concentration camps over 3 years in Poland, France, and Germany. He would be one of the 465 Daimler-Benz Jews selected for Nazi slave labor. Here, the first camp he was in, called Reichhof. My father was only 14, and after working labor to build the camp, he became a machinist for the Nazis. While here, his brother, who was in a different part of the camp, escaped and fled to the woods to join the resistance fighters. They promised to try and stay alive and meet after the war, and it was this promise and hope that helped my father fight to survive. At one point, the Nazis said no more Jews could be in the factory, and they were sent out on boxcars to another camp, Płaszów, made famous from the movie Schindler's List. This camp was built on the grounds of 2 Jewish cemeteries, and my father drew his memories of how they had to dig up the bodies using shovels and often just their bare hands. From there, they were sent to another camp, Wieliczka, where my father labored in the salt mines. After a few weeks, they were again loaded onto boxcars and sent across the border from Poland into Germany. This next concentration camp was called Flossenburg, and here my father labored in the stone quarry. The work was brutal, and many prisoners were killed when they no longer had the strength to do the heavy labor. In this drawing, as in many others, my father has included his prisoner number. The prisoner on the far left, bent over with a shovel, bears the number 16,019, which was my father's number in this camp. From there, they were sent into France. There was an abandoned tunnel through a mountain where the factory equipment had been brought. Inside the tunnel, someone had painted these words: "Here worked 462 Jews from Poland, as 3 had died." As the Allies approached, the tunnel was destroyed, and again these Jewish prisoners were moved. Loaded onto boxcars, they would be sent back into Germany. The next camp they were sent to was Sachsenhausen. Here my father drew the memory of French resistance prisoners forced to march in a circle with a T that stands for Tod, which means death in German. At the end of the day, one would be selected to be hung, and the next day these prisoners would march in circles again, a cruel and useless torture that went on in this camp. From there, my father and the dwindling prisoners from his group were sent to Wattenstadt. Here the group would be split and sent to 2 different camps. Another prisoner named Joseph Singer pleaded with my father to change uniforms and identities so he could stay with his friends. My father did this, and for a while took on the name of Joseph Singer. The prisoner who changed places with my father did not survive. My father's group went to Braunschweig, while the other prisoners went to a camp called Bremen. They were next sent to a camp called Ravensbrück. This was primarily a women's camp, but had a small sub-camp for men. As the Germans were losing the war, there was no work and little food for the prisoners, who began to die in large numbers. But one more time, they would be moved to the final and 10th camp. Veblen was not even complete when they arrived. Many of the buildings had no windows or doors, and as seen here, the bunks were not completed, and the prisoners just slept in straw on the mud floors. There was no work, barely any food, and the prisoners who died in great numbers were not buried, but just piled up in the yard. On the night of May 1st, they were put into the boxcars again, but after a long night, the trains did not move, and in the morning they were ordered off the trains. The Germans were shooting from the towers, and the prisoners tried to run and hide. Soon it was quiet, and it seemed as though the German guards were gone. It was a wondrous sight. American soldiers, a small group of 7 or 8, had discovered the camp accidentally, and my father and the other prisoners were free. This is a photo taken by an American soldier on that day, May 2nd, 1945. My father is the second prisoner from the right. After liberation, my father spent 2 years in a DP, which stands for Displaced Persons Camp. He was hoping to find his brother, and also kept sending letters and messages to his only relative who had been able to go to America before the war. Here is the telegram and papers he received saying he would finally get to go to America. He sailed from Germany on September 22nd, 1947. Here is his photo on the ship and another small drawing he made that day to remember his voyage. In America, he was encouraged to change his name to sound more American, which he did to George Salton. He served in the U.S. Army, met and married my mother, who was also a Holocaust survivor, and then used the GI Bill to continue his education. He went from the 5th grade, the last year he had completed in Poland, right to college, where he earned a bachelor's in physics and master's in engineering, and later had a career in the Pentagon. After our trip to Poland, I helped my father write his memoir that was just published in a 20th anniversary edition with a foreword by Michael Berenbaum, who curated the U.S. Holocaust Museum. Michael Berenbaum wrote, "We must be grateful to George Salton for writing his memoir. His work is painfully honest, and we must remain open to grasp the importance of his work." With the book came amazing discoveries. We wanted to include the photo of my father at Liberation that my father had found in a book in the Pentagon War Library. The Germans had called the American parachutists those devil in baggy pants. We sent this book to our publisher, and an editor there discovered that her father had been one of the 7 or 8 soldiers who had liberated the Veblen camp. We flew with CNN for a family meeting and discovered one of the sons had the Nazi flag that his father had cut down when he liberated the camp. In my town of Colleyville, Texas, I heard about another soldier who had liberated the camp. James McGillis, called Maggie, was the most highly decorated veteran of the 82nd Airborne and is a Medal of Honor nominee. I introduced my father to him, and they became friends, and even traveled to the Veblen camp where they had met across the barbed wire for a special ceremony. I last saw Maggie when he turned 101, and he died when he was 103. This past September, I traveled to Arlington National Cemetery to attend his funeral and pay my last respects as my father would have done himself. Father passed away in 2016, and telling his story and honoring the liberators is part of what I had taken on as his daughter. A few years ago, I heard about the Arlson Archives, which houses original Nazi documents, and began a search for my father's records. Looking up his name, knowing his date of birth and town, I made many discoveries. Here, my father's name on a Ravensbrück camp list. His name and number on an original list from the Flossenburg camp. And in beautiful handwriting, prisoner number 33,339, my father, from the concentration camp list from France. I found a post-war card that listed all 10 camps and many of his prisoner numbers. In the first camp, he had a low number of 222 because he was one of only 465 prisoners. I discovered a hand-drawn map of the camps and ghettos where someone had run out of space because these places of terror filled nearly every corner of more than 20 countries. According to the U.S. Holocaust Museum Encyclopedia, there were more than 44,000 sites, including camps, subcamps, and on an inside page of the Flossenburg Report, a few powerful sentences written by an American soldier. If a thought may be interjected, it is hoped that these volumes will prove of help to those who suffered, as well as those who want to prevent a recurrence of such suffering, and that it shall never in the future again be necessary to report such history. I discovered the bread list from the Veblen camp with a blank column on May 2nd, the day there was no bread, but instead freedom, when the American soldiers arrived. So much history to be discovered, so much these documents tell us and how they touch us. And I learned more about what happened on that night of May 1st when the trains did not leave Veblen. There is speculation that the tracks had been blown up by the Americans or the locomotive never arrived. What we do know is that those prisoners loaded on the boxcar were headed to Lübeck Bay. There, the prisoners from the Neuengamme and the subcamps, including Veblen, were loaded onto 2 ships that were mistakenly fired upon by the British aircraft and sunk, causing the death of more than 6,000 prisoners on May 3rd. My father would have been among them. My mother came to live with me a few years ago, and in my parents' home we found an envelope with these special items. My father's post-war pass as a former concentration camp prisoner, a small calendar and diary, and a collection of photographs of his friends from the DP camps. Turning them over, I recognized the names of his friends from his town, from the ghettos and 10 camps. They were now more than names. They were real people. I went back to searching the archives to try and find some of them and made incredible discoveries. Here, a list of the 465 Häftling, prisoners, Jews from Reichshof, on the way to Colmar in France near the tunnel. My father's name, third from the bottom. I went back to the Ravensbrück list and found their names, the hometowns and dates of birth of his friends. They all had Flossenburg possession cards, all blank because they had no possessions, but they had their information and signature, and then I matched them to the post-war cards indicating where they might be going. I started tracking them on Ancestry, Google, Facebook, and every possible way. I set out to find 7 of the friends my father had spoken of, written about in his book, friends who had been with him in the ghetto, in the 10 camps, and he had been liberated with, friends who had encouraged him, shared their bread, and helped keep my father alive. And I found them all. None knew the details of their fathers, who had all remained silent, just as my father had. We had a reunion in person and over Zoom from Sweden, Israel, New York, Texas, and New Jersey. Fathers had shared a bond of survival, never dreaming, I'm sure, that one day their children would find each other, become friends, and share a bond of remembrance. I also found out what happened to my father's brother, who never came to America or made contact with a relative in New York. I found a record stating that Monik, son of Herman, a student from Titchen, was alive in 1946. But I also found a man who said that his brothers were with my uncle in the woods, fighting in the resistance, and that after the war they had gone to find a Jewish baby girl who had been left with a Polish family. They did not want to give the baby up, and Monik was shot and killed by someone in that house through an open window. I also found that baby girl they went to reclaim, who took my uncle's last name as her own. A few words about my mother, who passed away at 100 years old. Her family fled Poland during the war and crossed into Russia. Unwilling to become Russian citizens, they were arrested and sent to Siberia. After the war, she returned to Poland and joined the Brigade, which means escape. This organization helped Holocaust survivors cross the mountains to flee Europe and collected the orphan children as seen in the bottom left photo. My mother is the woman in the top photo and also on the bottom left wearing the cape. 85% of all Jewish children in Europe were killed during the Holocaust, and it was their mission to find the remaining children that the parents had meant to reclaim after the war and bring them to Israel. And so years after helping my father write his memoir, I wrote Pillar of Salt, which tells of my father's return to Poland and how the stories are passed down through the generations. Here is a favorite photo, my father and son walking through the Majdanek concentration camp, walking in step and having the conversation that my father could not have with me until my adulthood. And now my son is helping to tell the story and produce a documentary film based on both books and my father's experiences. In January of 2022, my rabbi and friends were taken hostage at Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville, Texas, at the synagogue that I helped start. I remember having to tell my mother what was going on. After the Holocaust, how could this terrible hatred and anti-Semitism rise up again? Will we never learn? I attended the Senate hearing of Dr. Deborah Lipstadt, U.S. envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. Why is this position even needed? How can we fight or eradicate hate, the hate that only divides us and can easily lead to violence? These are the questions for all of us. This is why we need to learn from the past. Who was my father? He was Lucian Zaltzman. I look at his photo and I look at the painting and believe that he was trying to tell his story when it was unspeakable. I see in the painting a young man in the background with a yellow star and the number 222, the same number in a star in his notebook from 1946. Under my father's name, I see he has written the name of Joseph Singer. There are important things one must not, or maybe cannot, ever forget. And my grandmother, she was more than someone who died in the gas chamber. From my father's stories and her letters, sent from Poland with the heavy hand of a Nazi censor, I learned that she was a strong woman who sold and traded everything she had to get food for her family. I learned that she was brave and pleaded with every lawyer and judge my grandfather had worked with until she found some Christians who were willing to help get my grandfather released from the Gestapo prison. And I learned that she was the most loving mother who convinced my father to stay behind in the ghetto, for he didn't want to be left behind, but it might have been the only chance for him to survive. And he did. And so I am honored to carry her name and her memory. Thank you for letting me share my story.
Thank you so much, Anna. I know we all felt how powerful that story was, and the research that you did is just incredible and what you were able to find. I think we're going to remind people that we would like them to put their questions in the chat box. And I'm going to start with the one question that's already there, which says, did your father have the KL tattoo from Flossenburg?
He had a small tattoo, a dark blue one that I think I saw once, and I cannot remember specifically what it looked like. I do know that they were only in many of these camps for a short time. I think that Flossenburg was the camp that, if you read his memoir, and other people have spoken about and corroborated, including some survivors still alive, that they were brought in, stripped naked, and kept outside for 2 weeks naked for a quarantine. So he had some kind of a tattoo. I think it was on his upper arm. Other people in the group of his friends remarked that their father may have had a tattoo on the thigh, but I can't really be assured that it was from Flossenburg, but he did have a tattoo. And I guess if you want to unmute yourself, you can ask as well, or whatever. If you don't want to type.
Yeah, we're okay with that. If anyone wants to unmute themselves, I know that I'm sure a lot of you have questions. Did your father ever, Mike, you want to start?
I just have a couple of questions actually that came to mind. First of all, was your father an artist? I mean, those pictures are amazing.
No, he was an amateur artist. I mean, those paintings he painted when he was just in the DP camp at age 17, and he had only had a 5th grade education. But if you read his memoir, in the camps, it was discovered that he could draw. And at times the Nazis would make him draw terrible or pornographic images, you know, just as a young boy for their entertainment. It may have helped keep him alive. But he was, you know, a hobbyist. He liked to do all kinds of drawings and art. Mostly he was, you know, kind of a doodler. And if you look at, I'll grab it real quick. The cover of his memoir, you know, this was just done a ditto. Like, I was at a meeting, and it does have his Flossenburg prisoner number. But when he was at the Pentagon, I have notepads from Pentagon meetings, and he was always just more of using a pencil than a painter. And that's why he did those drawings that are, the original set is at Yad Vashem. There's a set at the U.S. Holocaust Museum, and online they are, including the watercolor paintings. Everything is no restrictions. Teachers that I know are downloading and printing some of them and using them for the classroom, since there's so much controversy about getting books admitted into use.
The only other question I have, one of the early photos you showed on the screen was of the Germans beating a bunch of Jews that were like kneeling on the ground. In the background, I saw a balcony with people standing. Are those supposed to be just onlookers, like local citizens onlooking? Is that what he was trying to depict?
You know what? That's a great question. I'm not really sure. I think that is depicting what was happening in the town before they went to the ghetto. And I know that, I've been to the town several times, and I think it could have been both, but I think it was the idea that they were subject to this mockery, this humiliation, to beatings, to killings, and that there was no intervention. No one was coming to their aid. No one could. And I think this is the beginning of their helplessness. I use this in schools, and I even, bring up the fact that, among the Nuremberg laws was not just restrictions on, having weapons or radios or curfews, but also such things that Jews couldn't own typewriters or radios or even have pets. And so trying to bring the message home that they lost so many of their dignities and freedoms and rights, all of their rights.
Thank you so much. It's been riveting. It really has.
So, Anna, there are a couple of questions in the chat box. I'm going to share them with you. I think the first one you probably answered, but we're going to do it anyway. She says, the drawings used in your presentation were very moving and powerful. You mentioned that your father created the watercolor painting. He must have been a talented artist. Did he create the pencil drawings in your presentation as well?
Yes, all of them, all of the drawings. And it wasn't that he created them for a purpose. I think he just, as he began speaking, he just started, drawing from the past. He did a lot of stuff with my mother, who was an artist, and started, a gallery. But, and interesting, I never asked him, but he always had the motif of a lighthouse in a lot of his pencil drawings or doodles or sketches or paintings. And I just, unfortunately, never got the chance to ask him what that might have, represented, whether it was some kind of safety or belief in the future or just a good memory. It could have been any of those. But those are all I have no artistic talent, so.
So the next question says, is there a Holocaust museum or Holocaust center in Colleyville?
No, Colleyville, where my synagogue is a very small town with a very small Jewish population. We're about 30 miles from Dallas and Fort Worth, right in the middle. And in Dallas, there is a Holocaust museum. Many others that I've also been to, in Texas, in Houston, El Paso, but not here. We are a small congregation located among some of the largest megachurches in the United States. One of them I'm speaking to, the fifth largest. So I'm doing a lot of work with schools, educator training for the state of Maine, Louisiana, teacher training in Tennessee, but also a lot of outreach to churches, because trying to bring the message there and hopefully have it filtered down to stop some of this bullying. If Aaron wants to show, we have a teaser, which is not the trailer, but we are working on a film and trying to bring in more artistic elements, because these next generations in high school, they're very visual, between the video games and graphic novels and anime, it's just different. And, I don't think incredible works like Ken Burns are going to reach them in the way that we're trying to just get the simple historical message through. And it's also what I tried to do in this presentation is give some basic facts about camps and ghettos. So I'm sure many people here might find it elementary, but we have the goal of trying to teach history and battle the distortion and revisionism that is rampant right now.
This next video is only a minute. We will get to the other questions as soon as it's finished.
Yeah. And it's not the trailer, so.
Early in the last century, a government of a large civilized country in Central Europe has decided that the segment of its population was less than human.
I remember just rummaging through one of the end tables looking for some playing cards, and I came across two old watercolor paintings of horrific scenes that I could not have even imagined. And they were signed by someone named L. Zaltzman.
And consequently, they could be denied access to education, that could be denied opportunity to work, they could be arrested, they could be beaten.
He wanted a family that replaced the family he lost. And he wanted that feeling of security.
I just really felt the need. I felt compelled to try and find out who my father really was. You know, who was this Lucian Zaltzman?
So that's not the trailer. We do have an original score, 2 and 3D animation and artist, but that was like I was telling Helen, that was, you know, I was browbeating the filmmaker. I was like, yeah, you have to give me something. But it does show a little bit of the art that we're using, because as I said, these next generations are very visual learners. And I think the traditional documentaries, the black and white, they've colorized unseen footage from the ghettos. We have films and interviews from the reunion, from family members. I think it's going to be quite remarkable when it's ready. We're now working on the final editing and then sound engineering, and I have no idea exactly how long that takes. So I just do what I'm told, trying to do some of the voiceover work right now.
So there are 2 other questions in the chat box, and then Norm and then Renee. So the first question says, I'm a teacher and would like to share the drawing that you mentioned that are online. Where would I find these?
So I'm going to put in my website on the chat box, and on there, not only are there all the drawings, there are the documents. There's links to stories. Arlson Archives did an exhibit, a living history exhibit online featuring me. There is the teaser, and there's also this presentation on YouTube that can be used in any book clubs, classrooms, synagogues, public schools, churches, anywhere. So feel free and to use it and share it.
Perfect.
I mean, I'm not primarily an author. I mean, yes, I've written the 2 books, but I mean, I've been doing this a long time. I told a reporter that when my rabbi was held hostage, you know, it was not my first hostage situation I witnessed in 1977 when I was in DC going to American University, and the Hanafi Muslims took over the B'nai B'rith house. And Marion Barry, who then became mayor, he was a city councilman, was shot and other people were killed. You know, I was outside and made the national news with a never again sign, which I later realized didn't mean anything to anybody, because at that point there were no museums, no movies, and I don't think it was as widespread. But this is something I grew up with, and it's just always been, maybe because I was so isolated, you know, in my community in Maryland, and we weren't part of a survivor community, that it was something that was very private and important. I mean, I remember in elementary school trying to tell one of my friends that my dad had been in the camps and his family had been killed. And the mother, who was Jewish, came to me and took me aside and said, don't ever talk about this again. So there really was, in my life, pressure to keep a secret. And that's what it was like in my house. No one talked about it. And we all kind of carried the pain and the shame. There's shame that this had happened to my family until my father went from, I think, being a victim to a survivor when people started thanking him for giving his testimony.
So the next question in the chat box says, what advice would you have for people who are trying to find out about their family stories?
Sure, great question. So number one, I would go on Ancestry, because Ancestry is partnered with the Arlson Archives. So I would also go to the Arlson Archives. Now, when you go to the arlson-archives.com, you can look someone's name up. But if you look up my father, there's only 3 documents. If you ask them to do the search, which can take anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months, they sent me 69 pages. So if they sent me the Flossenberg list, I also got the first page of the list, which has the table headings, cover pages. So it's definitely worth it. But on Ancestry, they also have other things like ship manifests. They had the Flossenburg list with links to the documents. So those are the two. Also, of course, Yad Vashem, Jewish Gen, and you just, have to be diligent, keep good notes, and don't give up. And Arlson Archives, they suggest about every 2 years, if you've done this, to go back because things are being digitized every single day.
Thank you. Norm, you're next.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. First of all, I wanted to thank you for sharing your family's amazing and inspirational story. And you answered some of my question just now, because I was wondering how you were able to find so much documentation. Besides the photographs, most of us have some photographs. I have very few. But it was amazing that you had all that documentation showing the trail, and then your father's amazing story. He's surviving 10 camps. It's almost beyond belief, but I feel inspired hearing the story. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And even on the Arlson Archives, they have, because they've partnered with Yad Vashem, they have post-war documents. So I know that I was on the phone with the education director of the Tennessee Holocaust Commission, and he was in the car with his wife and telling me about his father who had been in Mauthausen, and they had no documents. And while he was driving, it was like an hour drive, I was typing and I said, was your father, what was his name? And he said, Jacob. And I said, and it's not like the book. I said, he was a baker? Yes. So I said, I have found his documents right now. I'm looking at them. So, and sometimes it's shocking because you can look at a camp list and painfully so, you might see that under the name of your family name, Goldberg, let's say, from this town, that there were other Goldbergs from the town. So you may discover they didn't survive, but the names and birth dates of other relatives that maybe perished. So there's really, and that's why I say even things like I find like the hand-drawn map, they're powerful images. You can go and look up on Archive in Arlson, not just family names. You can look up camps. You can just look up photographs. Put in the word photographs, you'll be stunned at what's on there.
Thank you. Renee, you had a question.
Yeah, I must just say what everybody else has said, which is that your presentation is incredibly powerful and your work is life work. So really kol hakavod for all of your work. I'm a child of a survivor also, as we all are, and my father also did not speak about his experiences. And I'm wondering if you could expand on two pieces. One, what was it like before in your home, in your own head, before you understood what your father's background was? Because he spoke with an accent, I'm sure, which made him a little different from your friends. And what was going through your head before you learned, and how did it affect you? How has any of this affected your own child rearing for your children? And I'm not sure why I'm getting an echo. And I would like to ask if you could just expand a little bit more on what you're hearing about the Kanye West and the whole anti-Semitism piece currently. So
okay. You'll have to remind me if I don't remember all those questions. But yes, growing up, it was difficult. I didn't understand. I knew by the anguished look on my father's face when they would change the subject that these were painful things that I couldn't ask about. I had terrible nightmares, recurrent nightmares. If you read Pillar of Salt, my memoir, it's all in there. It's things that I think I share with many other people. And that's why I put it in there. And also just to tell the truth of what it was like to have parents that were different. I remember thinking my mother was a liar because people would say, where are you from? And she would say, I'm from Germany. And I'm like, you're not from Germany. Or she'd just say, I'm from Europe. But then just, a year ago, when I discovered her false papers, on all of her papers, it says she was from Berlin. And, both of my parents changed their names and didn't tell me. I mean, my mother only told me how old she was, like in the past 2 years. She said, I don't think I was born in 28, maybe it was 25. And then eventually it was like 22. So I think they felt compelled to take on this new persona There was a lot of pressure to leave the past behind, to move forward, and not just for survivors, also for American soldiers, who I have met so many families of liberators, and they say, my father never talked about it. He was changed. He had depression. I mean, you know, our understanding of trauma was really stilted, and I think, you know, damaging in a way. And because PTSD and trauma can be lifelong. When my father at the end got sick and was in the hospital, I remember, and, you know, I'm honest with you, you know, for a time he wanted to keep his shoes on, you know, in the bed, in the hospital. And I would have to say, Dad, you know, you're okay here. They're trying to help you. But these kind of protective fears that become, you know, not protective, stay with us. So, you know, yes, I was greatly affected. I felt like nobody knew me. It's all in my memoir. And then as far as my child rearing, I mean, you know, it's complicated. I live in a non-Jewish community. There was anti-Semitism. I'm participating in Dignity.us in their hate initiative. And when I go to churches and I say, you know, one year I came back from Poland and I said, I've been to a country with a ton of empty synagogues and no Jews. And now I'm here in a town with Jews and no synagogue. And I worked very hard to start the congregation and get it affiliated. I relearned my Hebrew to teach. I learned tropes so I could tutor. And then one year, a week after Christmas, or 2 weeks, I went outside in the morning and my lawn was covered with discarded Christmas trees brought from the dump. And it was a reminder that, you know, I'm still the Jew in town. So it's been a life of this, but I've also received a lot of support. You know, my neighbors banded together and came and took those trees away and wept. So I think, you know, by sharing the stories, the pain and all of it, we can connect with other people. And I have a author Facebook page, and I post a lot of stuff up there that I try to be educational. I put a picture of my Donic, the shoes. I put some, you know, real historical statistics, a picture of my father. And, you know, one post that I put up got 21,000 likes. And it becomes because I didn't think, oh, you know, the people have not been to my Donic. They've not seen a picture of a gas chamber to explain what is the blue from the Zyklon B, the outside that says bath and disinfection. So I'm trying to educate in a kind way. And I find that the connections, the responses are so moving and so powerful that it gives me hope. As far as Kanye, you know, it's a difficult situation. I'm a licensed therapist, although I'm not practicing now. I left, I worked inpatient psych. And when my mom came to live with me, there was no vaccine. And, you know, I had to put her first. She lived with me for 2.5 years. She passed away in July when she was 100. But I think that people might say, oh, Kanye, he might have some diagnosis. Is that excusable or not excusable? But then you look at, you know, all the conspiracy theories that are anti-Semitic, you know, about the Rothschilds or about that, you know, I have been getting, you know, hate messages. I've gotten some threats, and they still say Jews control the media, Jews, the banking, the Holocaust wasn't real. I mean, there's still a lot of that kind of, I don't know if you want to call it distortion, revisionism, delusion, but it's out there by everybody. So I think to focus just on Kanye, he just has a big platform. But even if Kanye took it all back or never said it, it's still out there and growing. And because of the internet, rapidly. I mean, I get a lot of hate stuff and a lot of anti-Semitic stuff. I keep it all, I track it all. And it's just, you know, when my synagogue, that hostage situation happened, you know, initially the FBI, and then they took it back, said it was random. Of course it wasn't, but I think that since then, and it's not even a year, we have realized that we are part of a trend. That is part of a growing trend of anti-Semitism. It wasn't isolated. It wasn't because he wanted to free one person. It was because where he came from in Manchester, England, he had been radicalized to believe the Jews control the government, the media, we have too much power. You know, all of that kind of stuff is now becoming entrenched and normalized in America and elsewhere.
So it looks like we have actually run out of time. I know that we all want to thank you for joining us this morning. It was a riveting conversation, and we learned so much. I have a feeling you have inspired some of the people on this call to research their own families a little more, and for everyone to find their own way to stand up to anti-Semitism. So
Yeah, and I'm going to put in my email address. So feel free, if you have questions, if you need help, if you make a great discovery, let me know. I'm happy to Zoom to any public schools, religious schools, church groups, book clubs, wherever, or even without me, you can Zoom and share. But I want to thank all of you because as children of survivors, I feel like, yay, I'm among my own, or in grandchildren of survivors, and I really don't get that experience. Usually I'm the odd one in the room, the other, the only Jew. I just was did some training in Tennessee where they don't have a single Jew in the school system, not a synagogue. But I will tell you, they are so inspired. 3 years ago, they raised money and took 35 high schoolers to Auschwitz. So Holocaust education, there's a lot to believe in. So, congratulations on having a mandate, and hopefully our work continues and we make a difference. So
thank you so much. And we will send out an email with all of the links and email addresses that Anna put into the chat box. So I hope everyone has a nice day, and maybe next year we will be back in person.
One last thing I want to do is, let me just put this up because I want to make sure everyone has it. That is the actual link to the Arlson archives.
And again, we will send that out following this to everyone.
You can go on right now and put in your family name and results will come up.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Anna.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.